Minister's questions and the budget statement from the Chancellor of the Exchequer will be able to watch on Parliament Live. I think it's important that people who do have should be able to listen about what we're providing. And I will say again that the questions and for the budget statement from the Chancellor of the Exchequer will be available to watch on Parliament Live TV. We now come to the questions to the Prime Minister. Number one is Neil Hudson. Dr. Neil Hudson.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others, during which my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, updated the Cabinet on how the government's plan for jobs is working, with higher wages, higher skills and rising productivity. He will make a statement to the House shortly, setting out how we will build a new age of optimism, Mr. Speaker. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Dr. Neil Hudson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I very much welcome the A66 Northern Trans-Pennine project from Penrith to Scotch Corner. This £1 billion investment will improve safety and congestion and help to level up our region, supporting jobs, essential services and tourism. But we have to get the project right. Will my right honourable friend ask his government departments for Transport, the Ministry of Defence and DEFRA to work together pragmatically and reasonably with suggested route amendments to ensure local communities such as Warkop, Musgrave and Sandford are not left blighted by these current plans?
Mr. Speaker, he's right that the development that he refers to is part of an infrastructure revolution I think will transform the country, but he's also right that we should consider local feedback from stakeholders and the community when finalising the design, and so we will.
Unfortunately, the Leader of the Opposition is isolating, so I'm calling Ed Miliband to ask the question on behalf of the Opposition. Ed Miliband.
Thank you. Just like the old day.
Just to say, I presume you all want to get onto the budget, because all you're doing is delaying it. Ed Miliband.
I just want to reassure both sides of the House it's one time only that I'm back. Mr. Speaker, we all need the vital COP26 summit in Glasgow to deliver next week, because failing to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees will have devastating consequences for our planet, and that is shared across this House. Does the Prime Minister agree that to keep that goal of 1.5 degrees alive, we need to roughly halve global emissions in this decisive decade?
Well, I welcome the right honourable gentleman to his place, and indeed, I think the whole House will extend our sympathies to the Leader of the Opposition. I hope he returns soon. It is, of course, correct, Mr. Speaker, that COP26 is both unbelievably important for our planet, but also very difficult, and it's in the balance. Mr. Speaker, and he's right in what he says about the need to keep 1.5 degrees alive, and that will be, and it does depend on what happens this decade. It depends on the commitments that are made. All I will say, Mr. Speaker, is that already very substantial commitments under the UK presidency designate of COP have been achieved, and we've moved from only 30% of the global economy committed to a net zero by the middle of the century to now 80%. And every day as I talk to international leaders, we hear further commitments to make those solid commitments that the world will need. Whether it is enough, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid it is too early to say.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, I applaud the efforts of the UK presidency under the President-designate Starmer, but I do want to direct the Prime Minister's attention to the issue of this decade. I'll come to net zero targets for the middle of the century in a moment, but yesterday a very important report came out from the United Nations, which he will know, the UNEP emissions gap report. And on the eve of COP, it warned that far from halving global emissions this decade, we're only on course to reduce them by about 7.5%. Does the Prime Minister acknowledge, because this is crucial for what happens at Glasgow and after Glasgow, does the Prime Minister acknowledge how far away we are from the action required in this 10-year period?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, indeed I do, but I think what the House should also recognise is how far we have moved just in the space of a few years since the Paris COP summit of 2015, where, as I'm sure the right honourable gentleman will remember, the world agreed to net zero by 2100, by the end of the century, and agreed to try to restrain global warming by 4 degrees. We're now trying to keep alive the prospect of restricting that growth to 1.5 degrees. Every day, Mr. Speaker, countries are coming through with solid commitments on stopping the output of coal-fired power stations, reducing their use on internal combustion engines, planting millions of trees and investing hundreds of billions of pounds in the developing world. Those are solid commitments. Whether they're going to be enough, Mr. Speaker, I'm afraid it is still too early to say.
The band. Solid commitments. I just correct the Prime Minister on one point. It was the second half of this century set out in Paris, not 2100 for net zero. But here's the problem, Prime Minister, on this question of net zero targets for the middle of the century. It's easy to make promises for 30 years' time. It's much more difficult to act now. Australia has recently announced a 2050 net zero target, but its 2030 target would head the world towards approximately 4 degrees of global warming. Can I urge him? He mustn't shift the goalposts when it comes to Glasgow. It is about the emergency we face this decade. It's about the NDCs this decade. Please keep the focus on 2030, not 2050 and beyond.
The focus is certainly on 2030. We have 122 nationally determined contributions already. 17 out of 20 G20 countries have made NDCs, and the commitments are coming through. And he's right to say that we need to keep the pressure up. What you can't do, Mr. Speaker, is go in advance of what is truly practicable for the world economy and for what people can do. This government will go as fast as we possibly can. But it was Labour's plans, which I think he endorsed, were condemned by the GMB union for which their paymasters, Mr. Speaker, for meaning that they'd be confiscating people's cars by 2030, and families would be only allowed 1 airplane flight every 5 years, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, let me tell him. What this summit needs is statesmanship, not partisanship, which we just heard from the Prime Minister. He should not be trying to score party political points on such an important issue facing our country and our world. That's never the way I did PMQs. Now let me ask him. Let me ask him about the crucial issue of climate finance for developing countries, because the reason that the Paris summit succeeded was there was a coalition of vulnerable countries and developed countries that put pressure on all the big emitters, including China, including India. But the problem is that the world has not delivered on the $100 billion of finance promised more than a decade ago in Copenhagen. The plan is to deliver it maybe in 2023. But I want to ask him about his actions. Hasn't it made it much harder to deliver on this promise that we are the only G7 country to cut the aid budget in the run-up to this crucial summit?
Mr. Speaker, I thought we weren't going to have any partisan points. Didn't last long. Actually, the first thing I did, one of the first things I did as Prime Minister was to go out to my first UNGA as Prime Minister, as UN General Assembly as Prime Minister, and announce a huge £11.6 billion commitment from the UK to helping the developed world to tackle climate change. And I'm going to say to the right honourable, yes, of course it's true. And we haven't cut that. We have not cut that, Mr. Speaker. We're keeping that investment. And let me tell the right honourable gentleman that this country is working flat out to ensure that we do reach the £100 billion commitment from the whole of the world. We're seeing the money come in from the United States, from the Italians, from the French, from the European Union, and it's quite right that it should. We have a way to go, Mr. Speaker. Whether we'll get there or not, I cannot say. It's in the balance. But the challenge is there for the leaders of the developed world, and I quite agree with the right honourable gentleman. They need to rise to it.
Speaker, it's one thing for him not to know what is in the Paris Agreement, but it's another for him not to know what's in his own budget. He has cut the aid budget. Of course he's cut cut the aid. Of course he's cut the aid budget. He's abandoned the bipartisan belief in the aid budget across both of these houses. But it's not just on aid, Mr. Speaker, where they've faced both ways. They've got a trade deal with Australia, where they've allowed them to drop their temperature commitments. They're telling others to power past coal while flirting with a new coal mine. And they're saying we've got to move beyond fossil fuels and opening the new Cambo oil field. Isn't the truth, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister has undermined his own COP presidency by saying one thing and doing another?
No, Mr. Speaker. And he's completely wrong. He's completely wrong in what he's. And I think he should withdraw what he's just said about the 11.6 billion, because we remain absolutely committed to the 11.6 billion pounds that we're investing to tackle climate change around the world, and that is absolutely rock solid. And he talks about Australia, and I talked to the Prime Minister of Australia only recently, and Australia has just with great difficulty made the commitment to get to net zero by 2050. It's a great thing. And Mr. Speaker, I talked yesterday to our Indonesian friends, for instance, Joko Widodo, a good friend of this country, who's agreed on coal to bring forward the abolition of coal use in Indonesia to 2040, Mr. Speaker. A fantastic effort by the Indonesians. I talked to President Putin, I think it was yesterday, Mr. Speaker, and he confirmed his determination to get to net zero by the middle of the century. And that is what the UK is doing, working with countries around the world to get the outcome we want. It's still too early to say whether it will succeed, Mr. Speaker. It's in the balance.
The thing the Prime Minister has underestimated throughout these last 2 years is COP26 is not a glorified photo opportunity. It is a fragile and complex negotiation. And the problem is boosterism. The Prime Minister's boosterism won't cut carbon emissions in half. Photo opportunities won't cut carbon emissions in half. Can I just say to the Prime Minister, in these final days before COP26, we need more than warm words. Above all, Glasgow has got to be a summit of climate delivery, not climate delay.
Prime Minister! He talks about cutting CO2 in half. Well, that's virtually what this government has done, Mr. Speaker. Since 1990, we've cut CO2 by 44%, and the economy's grown by 78%. And that's our approach, Mr. Speaker. A sensible, pragmatic, conservative approach that cuts CO2, that tackles climate change, and that delivers high-wage, high-skilled jobs across this country. And our net zero plan, Mr. Speaker, will deliver 440,000 jobs. That's what the people of this country want to see, and that's what they're seeing. They're seeing wages up, they're seeing growth up, they're seeing productivity up under this government. And if we'd left it to the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, who is sadly not in his place, we would still be in lockdown. But it's a point that he might bring to his attention wherever he is currently self-isolated.
Jane Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will know that both I and my honourable friend, the member for Wolverhampton South West, have lobbied for funding for better training and skills provision for young people in Wolverhampton. Our unemployment rate, youth unemployment, was unacceptably high pre-pandemic and now sadly is the highest rate nationally. Would the Prime Minister urgently look at how the government can level up opportunity so that young people in Wolverhampton can get the skills and the confidence they need to find work?
My honourable friend is absolutely right about Wolverhampton. That's why we're working flat out to ensure that young people in Wolverhampton benefit from the Kickstart scheme, and we are working with Wolverhampton Council to ensure that young people get bespoke support for their return to work.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the thoughts and prayers of the entire House will be with the family of Walter Smith, who sadly passed away yesterday, the legend that was the Rangers, Dundee United and Scotland manager, and many of us will not forget the day that he led us to victory over France at Hampden. Mr. Speaker, naturally, most of today's focus and attention will turn to the Chancellor's budget after Prime Minister's question. But before we turn to domestic matters, I think it's right and important to raise the dire humanitarian situation that is developing in Afghanistan. The World Food Programme estimates that more than half the population, about 22.8 million people, face acute food insecurity. 3.2 million children under 5 could suffer acute malnutrition. Given the history of the last 20 years, it should be obvious that we have a deep responsibility to this country and to its people. Mr. Speaker, they are dying and they need our help. It is only 2 months since the Allied forces relinquished control of the country. So can the Prime Minister update us on what exactly his government is doing to end the famine in Afghanistan?
Hear, hear, hear.
I thank the right honourable gentleman, and he raises an issue that I know is on the minds of many people in this House and across the country. We're proud of what we've done to welcome people from Afghanistan, but we must do everything we can also to mitigate the consequences for the people of Afghanistan of the Taliban takeover. And so what we did, as you will recall, is we doubled our aid commitment for this year to £286 million, and we're working with the UN agencies and other NGOs to do everything we can to help the people of Afghanistan. What we can't do at the moment is write a completely blank cheque to the Taliban government, the Taliban authorities. We need to ensure that that country does not slip back into being a haven for terrorism and a narco state.
Mr. Speaker, the fact is there is a humanitarian crisis and people are in need today. There is nothing there about tangible actions that the government is taking on the ground now, because the situation is getting worse by the day. In August, the Allies ran away from their responsibilities in Afghanistan, and now it very much feels like this government is washing its hands of the legacy that it left behind. Because not alone are the Afghan people being failed on humanitarian aid, promises made to them on resettlement are also being broken too. The Afghan Citizens Resettlement Scheme was announced on the 18th of August, which talked about resettling up to 20,000 in the coming years. But more than 2 months on, Mr. Speaker, we've heard nothing. The Afghan people are being left with no updates and vague targets. So can the Prime Minister finally tell us when the resettlement scheme will open? Can he guarantee, Prime Minister, that 20,000 Afghans will be resettled, and when exactly is the deadline for that to happen?
Mr. Speaker, we made a commitment to resettle 20,000 Afghans, in addition to those that we brought out under Operation Pitting, which I think most people, most fair-minded people in this country, would think was a pretty remarkable feat by UK armed services. And many of them are, those 15,000 are already being integrated into the UK, into schools, into communities, and we will help them in any way that we can. And one of the reasons, and I'm afraid he's completely wrong in his characterisation of the stance the UK has taken towards Afghanistan and the changes there. We continue to engage. We engage with the Taliban. This country was one of the first to reach out and begin a dialogue. And what we are insisting on is safe passage, Mr. Speaker. What we are insisting, just to get to his point where he rather uncivilly calls out, what we are insisting on, Mr. Speaker, is that there is safe passage for those who wish to come and settle in this country, for people to whom we owe an obligation. And that is what we are doing, Mr. Speaker. And I have answered the question.
David Warburton.
Okay. Thank you. As the whole House will know, today is National Cheese Toasty Day. A massive, it's a fact, a massive 4.3 billion toasties were consumed last year. They are the nation's favourite snack. And glorious Somerset is the home of cheddar cheese. So with the news that Wyke Farms in my constituency is now producing what I think is the world's first entirely carbon-neutral cheddar cheese, Did my right honourable friend know that eating cheddar from Somerset can reduce your cheese consumption carbon footprint by 55%? So will my right honourable friend support our vital dairy industry by committing to enjoying a carbon-neutral cheese toastie today?
Well, Mr. Speaker, my only question is, why is it only National Cheese Toastie Day? Why isn't it International Cheese Toastie Day? And I hope very much that amongst its many achievements, the COP26 summit will bring the entire global community to a better understanding of the Wyke Farms carbon-neutral cheese toastie.
So Geoffrey Donaldson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will be aware of the harm that the Northern Ireland Protocol is doing to the political and economic stability of Northern Ireland, and the very delicate constitutional balance created by the Belfast or Good Friday Agreement. In the command paper published by the Government in July, they committed to addressing these issues and recognised that the protocol is simply not sustainable. Does the Prime Minister accept that the conditions now exist to trigger Article 16 of the protocol in the event that the current negotiations with the EU fail to arrive at an acceptable outcome?
So we can negotiate. The right honourable gentleman is completely right. I'm sad to say in what he says, and we're working hard to secure an agreement by negotiation, but we need to see real progress, because he knows the real life issues on the ground in Northern Ireland haven't gone away, and if we can't see progress, as we've been saying now for some months, if we can't see rapid progress in the way that we spelt out in our command paper, then I think that it's clear to everybody that the conditions for invoking Article 16 have already been met.
Robin Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Airedale Hospital in my constituency is made predominantly from aerated concrete, which is known for its structural deficiencies and is now in desperate need of a new rebuild. As the Prime Minister will be aware, the Airedale Hospital recently submitted its bid to government for a brand new carbon-neutral hospital. It is fantastic news that this Conservative government will deliver 48 new hospitals, but can I make an urgent plea to the Prime Minister that the Airedale is one of them?
Well, yes, Mr. Speaker, here with my honourable friend, we're hearing a little bit more. Indeed, the whole House will be hearing more about the spending for health in just a few moments. But I can tell him that we've received 120 applications for the biggest hospital building programme in a generation, and his application will certainly be amongst those who will get our most urgent consideration.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. This government is failing women and girls. From lack of rape prosecutions, no victims bill, to letting criminals off the hook. And now women and girls, including my own children, are being targeted with a sinister form of spiking through injections. It's always women and girls who pay the heaviest price. Now they are taking a stand today and saying enough is enough. So how many more women and girls will be hunted or excluded before the Prime Minister himself finally takes a stand?
Mr. Speaker, the reports of spiking are extremely disturbing, and as the Honourable Lady knows, it's already a criminal offence, and I know that the Home Secretary, my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, has asked the police to update her on exactly what details they have of what is happening. She wants to give them the space for the time being to conduct their inquiries into what's going on, but I would ask everybody with information about such incidents to come forward and contact their local police.
Morris.
With COP26 being imminent, I would like to draw attention to what good work's being done in Morecambe with the Eden project. Wes Johnson at Morecambe and Lancaster College has put forward a programme to teach youngsters in Morecambe the international Eden ethos to, shall we say, propagate the goodwill around the world. I'd like to invite the Prime Minister to come to Morecambe and come to the Morecambe Riviera to see the Eden project site at the earliest convenience. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to respond in the affirmative, but to my honourable friend, because I think the last time he asked me about this, it was to ensure that we got an Eden project in Morecambe. So it sounds from what he's saying as though we're making progress in that direction, and that is thrilling.
Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will want to send my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, our best wishes. And it's also good, Mr. Speaker, to see a few more Conservative MPs heeding the Health Secretary's plea and wearing masks in this chamber. But given we have had for several weeks now COVID infection, hospitalisation and death rates far, far higher than any other Western European country, was it a mistake to abandon all those precautions back in July? And if not, why are our figures so bad?
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question, but the reality is that, of course, we monitor all the data very carefully every day, but we see nothing to suggest that we need to deviate from the plan that we've set out that began with the roadmap in February and that we are sticking to, that has given business and given this country to get on and achieve the unlockings that we've seen and indeed the fastest economic growth in the G7.
Jane Hunt.
Speaker, my Loughborough constituent Sophia Dady has composed a song about the positive action we can each take to combat climate change, which emphasises the need to clean, repair and protect. Will the Prime Minister join me in encouraging all UK schools to follow the lead of Fairfield Prep School in Loughborough and other schools across the world from Hawaii to Norway in raising awareness of this important issue through learning the song?
Well, yes, Mr. Speaker. Do I have to learn the song? I'll do my best, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my honourable friend for raising the work of her constituents and her constituent school. And it is absolutely vital that we not only recycle where it's sensible, but above all, we cut down on the use of plastics, Mr. Speaker.
Sarah Sultana.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week it was revealed that fossil fuel companies, interest groups and climate denialists have donated £1.3 million to the Conservative Party and its MPs since 2019. So a simple question, no waffling or dodging the issue. On the eve of COP26, will the Prime Minister demonstrate that he is serious about tackling the climate emergency by paying back this money and pledging that his party will never again take money and donations from the fossil fuel companies that are burning our planet? Yes or no?
Mr. Speaker, all our donations are registered in the normal way, and I just remind her that the Labour Party's paymasters, the GMB, think Labour's policies mean that no families would have only to take one flight every 5 years, Mr. Speaker, and have their cars confiscated.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week it's UK Wind Week, and later this afternoon I'll be welcoming some young people from my constituency who see their futures in the renewable energy sector, which has done so much to level up the Grimsby, Cleethorpes and North East Lincolnshire. Will the Prime Minister give an assurance that the government will continue to invest in the skills and development of our young people to benefit the regional renewable energy sector?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I think the whole House should be proud of the fact that the UK now produces more offshore wind, still produces more offshore wind than not hot air.